January 17, 1947, Nuremberg, room 600. Air smells of old wood and mimeograph ink. Cold light filters through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. In the witness gallery, a woman sits with her hands folded in her lap. Her name is Johanna Altvater. She is 41 years old. Her hair is pulled back severely. She wears a grey wool suit that hangs loose on her frame. In her briefcase, there is a document. It is 8 pages long, typed on Führer Hauptquartier stationery, stamped, initialed in 3 places. Signed at the bottom in blue ink. She has carried it for 19 months, sewn into the lining of a coat, buried in a garden in Berchtesgaden, hidden in the false bottom of a suitcase. She has not slept well since she took it. The document is a directive. It concerns the treatment of female prisoners of war, specifically Allied women, specifically those held in certain facilities east of the Rhine. The language is administrative. The content is not. Johanna Altvater joined the Reich Chancellery secretarial pool in 1938. She was efficient, discreet, she typed fast, she asked no questions. By 1943, she had been reassigned to the Wolfschanz command complex in East Prussia, where she worked directly under Martin Bormann's administrative staff. Her role was procedural. She prepared copies of directives, filed correspondence, maintained logs of outgoing orders. She saw many things. She said nothing. This was expected. This was survival. But in the spring of 1944, something changed. A directive came through her desk that she could not forget. It was not marked with the usual euphemisms. It was explicit. It granted operational latitude to camp commandants and SS Gruppenführers overseeing detention facilities holding female Allied personnel, primarily British SOE agents, American OSS operatives, and captured resistance coordinators. The directive outlined a tiered protocol. It specified conditions under which these women could be subjected to what it called intensified interrogation procedures. It used the word Sonderbehandlung, special treatment, but clarified the scope in clinical language. It permitted coercion. It permitted psychological conditioning. It permitted physical intervention prior to what was termed final resolution. It was signed by Adolf Hitler, countersigned by Heinrich Himmler, witnessed by Bormann. She made a copy. She does not know why. She hid it. She survived the war, and now, in January 1947, she has come forward. The prosecution team had not expected her. She contacted the Allied Tribunal offices in November 1946 through a priest in Bavaria. She offered testimony. She offered evidence. She was interviewed twice in separate locations by different officers. Her story remained consistent. Her document was analyzed. The paper matched Reich Chancellery stock from 1944. The typeface matched known chancellery machines. The signature matched known samples of Hitler's hand. The stamps were authentic. Forensic analysis confirmed the ink composition. The document was real. But the content was a problem, not because it was false, because it was redundant in a specific, horrible way. The tribunal already knew that women had been tortured, that SOE agents had been executed, that female prisoners in camps like Ravensbrück, Natzweiler, and Mauthausen had endured systemic brutality. Witness testimony had established this. Survivors had spoken. Mass grave had been uncovered. But what Johanna Altvater carried was different. It was authorization. It was the paper trail. It was proof that the violence was not the result of rogue commanders or localized excess. It was policy, centralized, approved at the highest level, documented. The directive did not create the abuse. It formalized it. It gave it structure. It transformed cruelty from an operational deviation into an operational standard. The document outlined 3 categories of treatment. Category 1 applied to prisoners deemed to hold no intelligence value. They were to be processed through standard detention protocols and transferred to labor assignments. Category 2 applied to prisoners suspected of possessing tactical information. They were subject to enhanced methods, defined in a subsection with startling precision: isolation exceeding 14 days, caloric restriction to subsistence levels, environmental stress exposure, and psychological disorientation techniques. Category 3 applied to prisoners identified as command-level operatives or coordination figures within resistance networks. For these women, the directive authorized what it called full-spectrum conditioning, a term left deliberately vague, but contextualized by a reference to SS Obergruppenführer Reinhard Heydrich's 1942 Security Memorandum on Counterinsurgency Escalation. The conditioning was time-limited. The directive specified that Category 3 subjects were not to be held beyond 60 days. At the end of that period, they were to be transferred to executive resolution, execution, but the 60 days preceding that resolution were a window, and the directive opened it. The tribunal investigators cross-referenced the directive with camp records. They found correlations. At Ravensbrück, between April and August 1944, at least 37 British and Allied women were classified under special detention codes. Their files noted extended interrogation and behavioral conditioning entries. At Natzweiler-Struthof, 7 women, SOE agents dropped into France, were held for periods matching the 60-day window. All 7 were executed in July 1944 by lethal injection, their bodies cremated the same night. Their interrogation logs referenced approved intensification protocols. At Morthausen, a sub-camp designated for political and intelligence prisoners, 4 American women captured in Austria were logged under Category 3 status. They died within 53 days of arrival. The directive had been implemented, quietly, methodically, with signatures. Johanna Altvater did not speak at the trial. She was a witness for deposition only. Her testimony was entered into the record. Her document became Prosecution Exhibit 288C. The tribunal debated its inclusion. Some argued it was redundant. Others argued it was essential. In the end, it was filed, but it did not feature prominently in the final judgments. The men on trial were already condemned by other evidence. The directive was an echo of a truth already established, but echoes matter because they confirm, because they remove doubt. In the quiet of room 600, the woman with the briefcase does not move. The trial continues around her. The gallery is full. The translators murmur in their glass booths. The judges sit in black robes. History is being written. She is a footnote, but she knows what she carries. She knows what it means, that the worst things were not chaos. They were paperwork. April 12, 1944. Wolfschanz, East Prussia. The complex sprawls across 2.5 square kilometers of forest, concrete bunkers hidden beneath camouflage netting, guard towers, minefields, 3 security perimeters. This is Führer Hauptquartier, the wolf's lair. The air is damp. Pine needles carpet the paths between buildings. Inside Bunker 13, the administrative wing, the typewriters never stop. Johanna Altvater works at a steel desk in a room with no windows. There are 6 other secretaries. They do not speak unless necessary. The work is constant. Directives, orders, memoranda, logistics reports, everything flows through this room. Everything is copied, filed, distributed. The paper smells of carbon. Her fingers are stained blue from the ribbons. The directive arrives on her desk at 14:30 hours. It comes in a manila folder marked Geheim Reichsach, Secret Reich Matter. The folder is sealed with red wax. It has been opened once by her supervisor, who has initialed the routing slip and placed it in her queue. Her task is simple. Type 3 copies, file the original, distribute copies to designated recipients according to the attached list. She opens the folder. She reads the first page. Then she reads it again. The document is titled Richtlinien zur Behandlung weiblicher Feindlicher Agenten in Schutzhaft, Guidelines for the Treatment of Female Enemy Agents in Protective Custody. The date is April 8, 1944, 4 days old. The issuing authority is the Führer's Chancellery, Office of Internal Security Coordination, in consultation with the Reichsführer SS. The language is formal, legal, bureaucratic, but the content is methodical horror dressed in administrative clarity. Section 1 outlines the legal framework. It references the 1929 Geneva Convention, but dismisses its applicability on grounds that irregular combatants, partisans, saboteurs, intelligence operatives, fall outside the protections afforded to uniformed military personnel. It cites previous Reich directives, including the 1941 Commissar Order and the 1942 Commando Order, establishing precedent for exceptional treatment of enemy combatants engaged in what it terms illegal warfare. It specifies that female agents captured behind German lines are to be classified not as prisoners of war, but as Sicherheitshäftlinge, security detainees. This distinction is critical. It removes them from Wehrmacht jurisdiction and places them under SS control. It removes accountability. Section 2 defines the 3-category system. Category 1, low-value detainees, couriers, support personnel. Category 2, operatives with tactical knowledge, wireless operators, local network coordinators. Category 3, command-level operatives, trainers, sabotage specialists, assassination operatives. Each category has a protocol. Category 1 subjects are processed through standard camp intake. Category 2 subjects are held for interrogation not exceeding 28 days, after which they are transferred to labor detail or reclassified. Category 3 subjects enter a different process entirely. The language becomes more precise. Category 3 subjects are to be isolated immediately upon intake. They are not to be integrated into general camp populations. They are not to be assigned labor duties. They are to be held in dedicated facilities equipped for sustained interrogation operations. The directive lists 5 such facilities by code name: Nacht und Nebel holding centers at Ravensbrück, Natzwiller, Morthausen, Grossrosen, and Stutthof. It specifies that Category 3 subjects are to be processed within a maximum 60-day operational window. The purpose of this window is stated plainly: intelligence extraction and psychological neutralization prior to executive action. Section 3 is titled Interrogation Escalation Procedures. It is 2 pages long. Johanna types it slowly. The directive authorizes sleep deprivation cycles exceeding 72 hours. It authorizes caloric intake reduction to 800 kilocalories per day, sustained for periods up to 3 weeks. It authorizes environmental conditioning, temperature extremes, darkness, sensory isolation. It authorizes chemical assistance, truth serums, specifically sodium pentothal and mescaline derivatives, administered under medical supervision. It authorizes physical stress positions maintained for durations sufficient to induce cooperation. It does not use the word torture. It uses the word verschärft Vernehmung, sharpened interrogation, the same term the Gestapo has used since 1937. But there is more. Section 3, subsection D, addresses what it calls psychologische Zersitzung, psychological decomposition. It references studies conducted by SS medical staff at Dachau and Buchenwald between 1942 and 1943, focused on breaking resistant subjects through controlled trauma exposure. The methods are not detailed in the directive itself. This is referenced as Chinese letter NNEX materials available through SS Hauptamt channels, but the purpose is clear: to dismantle identity, to create compliance, to render the subject incapable of resistance, not through pain alone, but through systematic obliteration of will. Section 4 is titled Final Resolution Protocols. At the conclusion of the 60-day window, if intelligence extraction is complete or deemed exhausted, the subject is to be transferred to executive processing. The directive specifies 3 approved methods: lethal injection, shooting, or gas. It notes that execution is to be carried out discreetly and without ceremony. Bodies are to be cremated within 12 hours. No records are to be maintained beyond internal security logs. No notification is to be provided to families or neutral governments. The subject is to disappear. Nacht und Nebel, night and fog. The phrase is repeated. It is doctrine. It is policy. It has been since 1941. At the bottom of page 8, there are 3 signatures. The first is typed beneath: Adolf Hitler, Führer und Reichskanzler. The signature is in blue ink, slightly slanted with the characteristic compressed loops. The second signature belongs to Heinrich Himmler, Reichsführer SS, neat, precise, dated April 9th. The third is Martin Bormann, head of the party chancellery, dated the same day. Below the signatures, a stamp, sofort, immediate. And a distribution code, nur für den Dienstgebrauch, for official use only. Johanna finishes typing the third copy at 16:45. She stacks the pages. She clips them. She places the original back in the folder. She prepares the distribution envelopes. 1 copy goes to SS Obergruppenführer Oswald Pohl, head of the SS Economic and Administrative Main Office, which oversees the concentration camp system. 1 copy goes to Ernst Kaltenbrunner, head of the Reich Security Main Office, which controls the Gestapo and SD. 1 copy goes to the Wehrmacht High Command Liaison Office for information purposes only. She seals the envelopes. She logs the distribution in the duty ledger. She returns the original to the secure filing cabinet, but before she does, She takes the carbon paper from her typewriter. She folds it carefully. She places it in her purse. That night in her quarters, she reconstructs the document from the carbon impressions. It takes 3 hours. She types it on thin onion skin paper. She hides it in the lining of her winter coat. She does not know what she will do with it. She only knows that it must exist outside the system that produced it, because systems destroy evidence. Systems erase. And she has learned, in this place, that erasure is the final cruelty. The directive was never intended to be seen. It was operational guidance, compartmentalized, distributed only to those who needed to implement it. It was never mentioned in public speeches. It was never referenced in propaganda. It existed in the shadow space where policy meets practice, where authorization becomes action. And for 2 years, it functioned exactly as designed. Until a woman with a typewriter decided otherwise. July 7, 1944. Ravensbrück concentration camp, northern Germany. The camp sits 80 kilometers north of Berlin, hidden in the forests near Fürstenberg. It was built for women, opened in 1939. By the summer of 1944, it holds over 40,000 prisoners, political detainees, resistance fighters, Jews, Romani, Jehovah's Witnesses, and a smaller group kept separate, Block 32, a low brick building at the edge of the main compound behind a second fence. No markings, no signs. The guards call it das Bunker, the bunker. Inside are 32 cells. Each cell is 2 meters by 3 meters. A cot, a bucket, a small barred window near the ceiling. The women held here are not part of the general camp population. They do not work in the factories. They do not stand for roll call in the main yard. They are recorded in separate logs. Their names are not spoken aloud. On this morning, a transport arrives. 4 women, British SOE agents, dropped into France between February and May, captured by the Abwehr and Gestapo in separate operations, transferred through Fresnes prison in Paris, moved by rail to Germany. They are brought into Block 32 at dawn. Their heads are shaved, they are photographed, fingerprinted, strip-searched. Each woman is assigned a number, not a name. They are placed in isolation cells. The doors are solid steel. There are no sounds from outside, no voices, no footsteps, only silence. One of the women is Violette Charbot, 23 years old, born in Paris to French mother and English father, widowed. Her husband, a French foreign legionnaire, was killed at El Alamein. She joined SOE in 1943, trained at Beaulieu and Ringway, dropped into Rouen in April 1944 to coordinate resistance sabotage ahead of the Normandy landings, captured June 10th in a firefight near Salon-la-Tour. She fought until her ammunition ran out. She was interrogated for 3 weeks in Paris. She gave nothing. Now she is here. Another is Denise Bloch, 32 years old. French-born Jewish family fled to England in 1942. SOE wireless operator, dropped into France in March 1944, worked with the clergyman network near Nantes, transmitting intelligence on German troop movements, captured in June during a Gestapo sweep. Her radio was found. She was beaten during interrogation. She transmitted no messages under duress. Now she is here. Another is Lillian Rolfe, 30 years old, born in Paris, British citizen, SOE wireless operator assigned to the Historian network, dropped into France in April, captured in late July during a safe house raid. Her codes were not compromised. She swallowed her suicide pill, but it failed to dissolve. She survived. Now she is here. Another is Cecily Lefort, 44 years old, British, married to a French doctor, SOE courier for the Jockey Network in southern France, captured in September 1943, held in Fresnes for 9 months, transferred through multiple facilities. Now she is here. These 4 women are classified as Category 3. Their files contain the notation NN Sonderbehandlung, night and fog special treatment. The 60-day clock begins the moment they enter Block 32. The interrogations begin the same day. The interrogation rooms are on the lower level of Block 32. Concrete floors, whitewashed walls, a single chair bolted to the floor, a desk, a lamp. The sessions are conducted by Gestapo officers rotated in from Berlin, assisted by Camp SS personnel. The methods follow the directive precisely. Isolation first, sensory deprivation, no light, no sound, no human contact except during interrogation, meals reduced, water rationed, sleep cycles disrupted. The door opens at random intervals, 2 hours after the last session, 20 minutes, 8 hours, there is no pattern, the mind begins to fray. When they are brought to interrogation, they are asked questions they have already answered. The same questions, over and over. What is your network structure? Who are your contacts? What are your radio schedules? Where are the weapon drops? The questions are asked calmly, methodically. When the answers do not satisfy, the pressure increases. Standing for hours, arms extended against the wall. If they collapse, they are left on the floor, then lifted, positioned again. The body breaks before the mind. But the mind is the target. Camp medical records, recovered after the war, show repeated entries for Block 32 prisoners during this period. Weight loss exceeding 15 kilograms in 30 days. Evidence of contusions, lacerations, fractures to fingers and ribs. Notations of chemical assistance administered. Sodium pentothal injections logged on specific dates, 3 to 5 times per subject. One doctor's note, dated August 3, 1944, records a prisoner's deterioration under interrogation, subject non-responsive to verbal stimulus, extreme weight loss, psychological disintegration evident, recommend termination of process within 1 week. The note is signed by Dr. Percival Trait, Ravensbrück camp physician. He will be tried at Hamburg in 1946. He will be hanged in 1947. The women endure. Violette Chabot gives no names. Denise Bloch gives no codes. Lillian Rolfe gives no network intelligence. Cecily Lefort gives no safe houses. The interrogators escalate. The methods intensify. There are references in depositions taken after the war to electric shocks, waterboarding precursors, sexual humiliation techniques. Former prisoners held in adjacent cells recalled hearing screams, pleading, then silence. One survivor, a Polish resistance member in Block 32 during the same period, testified in 1947, "We knew when they brought the British women. We could hear it. And then, after weeks, we heard nothing. That was worse." By late August, the 60-day window is closing for the first group. Camp records show a notation on August 28, Sonderbehandlung abgeschlossen, special treatment concluded. On the evening of September 5, 1944, Violette Chabot, Denise Bloch, and Lillian Rolfe are removed from Block 32. They are not told where they are going. They are taken to the crematorium area. They are made to kneel. They are shot in the back of the head. Their bodies are cremated that night. The crematorium logs, recovered in 1945, record only 3 items processed, 22-30 hours. No names, no nationalities, no cause of death, 3 items. Cecily Lefort was executed separately in early 1945 as Soviet forces approached from the east. The exact date is unknown. Her body was never identified. These 4 women were not the only ones. At Ravensbrück alone, between April 1944 and January 1945, at least 27 British and Allied female agents were processed through Block 32 under Category 3 protocols. Most were executed. Some were transferred to Belsen or other camps and died of disease or starvation before liberation. At Natzweiler-Struthof in the Alsace region, 4 more SOE agents, Andrei Borrell, Vera Lee, Diana Rowden, Sonia Olshansky, were executed by lethal injection on July 6, 1944. Their bodies were burned in the camp crematorium. The ashes were scattered. A witness, a camp prisoner assigned to crematorium duty, later testified, "They were brought in at night. They knew. One of them asked for water. They were not given water. They were injected. It took minutes. Then we burned them." At Morthausen, at Dachau, at Stutthof, similar patterns emerge in the fragmentary records that survived the war. Women captured in intelligence roles, women held in isolation, women subjected to interrogation protocols that exceeded any legitimate military purpose, women who disappeared. The Directive had created a mechanism. It had standardized cruelty. It had made systematic what might otherwise have been random. And it had done so with signatures, with filing systems, with bureaucratic precision. The women who endured this did not break easily. They were trained. They were prepared for capture. They knew the risks. But the Directive was not designed to extract intelligence. That was secondary. The Directive was designed to destroy, to punish, to send a message that even the most covert resistance would be met with absolute, dehumanizing obliteration. The 60-day window was not about information. it was about power. It was about demonstrating that the Reich could reach anyone, anywhere, and erase them so completely that even their suffering would leave no trace. But traces remain, because one secretary kept carbon paper, because some prisoners survived to testify, because the ovens could not burn everything. November 22, 1945, London, Special Operations Executive Headquarters, Baker Street. The war has been over for 6 months. The building is quieter now, fewer staff, fewer operations. The files are being sorted, closed, archived. In a third-floor office, Vera Atkins sits at a desk covered with folders. She is 46 years old, Romanian-born, British by naturalization. She served as intelligence officer for SOE's French section throughout the war. She recruited agents. She trained them. She sent them into occupied Europe. 118 women. 39 did not return. Vera Atkins has made it her mission to find out what happened to every single one. He has been traveling since June. France, Germany, Belgium. She has interviewed survivors. She has visited camps. She has walked through ruins. She carries a briefcase with photographs, names, last known locations. She cross-references prisoner logs, transport records, execution lists. She works alone mostly. The war crimes investigation apparatus is massive but disorganized. Evidence is scattered. Witnesses are traumatized or dead. Camp records were destroyed, but some things survive. And Vera Atkins is relentless. In September, she visited Ravensbrück. The camp had been liberated by the Soviets in April. Most of the SS staff had fled. The commandant, Fritz Suren, was in hiding. The site was chaos. Barracks burned. Mass grave partially excavated. Soviet authorities were cooperative but overwhelmed. Atkins walked through Block 32. She found cells still intact. She found scratches on the walls, initials, dates, messages. One cell had a small cross carved near the floor. Another had the letters VS etched into the plaster near the window frame, Violette Charbot. Atkins interviewed survivors, Polish women, French women, women who had been held in adjacent blocks. They remembered the British agents. They remembered the isolation, the screaming, the silence. One woman, Odette Sansom, had survived Ravensbrück despite being classified Category 3. She had been kept in total darkness for months, beaten, interrogated, but her cover story, that she was related to Winston Churchill, had given her captors pause. They kept her alive as a potential bargaining chip. She was liberated in May 1945. She told Atkins everything she knew. She remembered Violette. She remembered the others. She remembered the night in September when the women were taken out. Atkins returned to London with names, with dates, with testimony. She compiled reports. She submitted them to the British War Crimes Investigation Unit. She provided evidence for the tribunals, but something was missing. She had the what, she needed the why. Why had these women, who were clearly military operatives under international law, been treated with such systematic brutality? Why had they been isolated, tortured, and executed rather than held as prisoners of war? The Geneva Convention was clear. Even irregular combatants were entitled to basic protections once captured. What authorization had been given? In early November, a memo crossed her desk. It came from British intelligence liaison officers working with the Nuremberg prosecution team. A German woman, a former Reich Chancellery secretary, had come forward with a document, a directive signed by Hitler concerning the treatment of female enemy agents. The memo included a summary. Atkins read it twice. Then she requested a full copy. The document arrived on November 18th. She read it in her office with the door closed. 8 pages, typewritten, stamped, signed. She read the categories, the protocols, the 60-day window, the authorization for intensified interrogation. The final resolution clause. She read it and understood. This was not aberration. This was policy. She cross-referenced the directive's dates with the capture and execution dates of the women she had been tracking. Violette Charbot, captured June 10, 1944, executed approximately September 5, 1944, 87 days, close to the 60-day operational window, adjusted for transport and intake processing. Denise Bloch, captured June 18, executed September 5, 79 days. Lillian Rolfe, captured July 31, executed September 5, 36 days, likely expedited due to camp overcrowding and the approaching Soviet advance. The timelines matched. The directive had been implemented. Her agents had been processed through a system designed specifically to break and erase them. Atkins compiled a detailed report. She listed every British SOE agent whose treatment aligned with the directive's provisions. She documented the camps, the dates, the methods. She included survivor testimony, medical records, crematorium logs. She submitted it to the War Crimes Executive in December 1945. The report was titled, Systematic Violation of Geneva Protections, Evidence of Coordinated Abuse and Execution of British Female SOE Personnel in German Custody, 1944–1945. It was 63 pages long. It became foundational evidence in multiple war crimes prosecutions. But the directive itself was a problem for prosecutors. Not evidentially, it was authentic, verified, damning. The problem was jurisdictional and procedural. By the time Johanna Altvater came forward in late 1946, the major Nuremberg trials were already underway. The primary defendants, Göring, Ribbentrop, Keitel, Jodl, were being tried for crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity on a massive scale. The systematic murder of millions. The enslavement of entire populations. The directive concerning Allied female agents, as horrific as it was, represented a comparatively small number of victims. 30, perhaps 40 women, maybe more. The evidence was clear, but in the calculus of tribunal resources and time, it was a secondary exhibit. The directive was entered into evidence as Prosecution Exhibit 288C on January 22, 1947. It was referenced in the case against Ernst Kaltenbrunner, head of the RSHA, who had received one of the original distribution copies. His defense argued he had no direct operational control over camp policies. He was convicted on other grounds: complicity in the Holocaust, mass executions of POWs, systematic extermination programs. He was hanged on October 16, 1946. The directive was footnoted. It was also referenced in the Ravensbrück trial held in Hamburg between December 1946 and February 1947. 16 SS staff members were tried for war crimes committed at the camp. The directive was presented as evidence of systematic policy guiding camp operations. Several defendants claimed they were following orders. The tribunal rejected this defense. 9 were sentenced to death. 7 were executed. The directive was cited in the judgment as proof that orders themselves could be criminal. But Hitler was dead, Himmler was dead, Bormann was missing, presumed dead. The men who signed the directive could not be held accountable. The system they built had collapsed. The bureaucracy that had enabled the directive, the filing systems, the distribution networks, the administrative layers that turned a signature into suffering had been dismantled. What remained was paper, testimony, evidence, and the question of what it all meant. Vera Atkins continued her work. She tracked down Fritz Suren, Ravensbrück's commandant, in 1946. He was tried and executed in 1950. She found Johann Schwarzhuber, the camp's deputy commandant, who had directly supervised Block 32. He was tried at the Ravensbrück trial. He confessed to the executions. He was hanged in May 1947. She located Dr. Percival Trait, who had overseen medical experiments and signed off on prisoner disposals. He was tried and sentenced to death. He hanged himself in his cell before the sentence could be carried out. She identified the Gestapo officers who had conducted interrogations. Some were tried in subsequent proceedings, some disappeared, some lived quiet lives under false names until the 1960s when Nazi hunters found them. Justice was slow, incomplete, but it moved. Atkins never stopped. She located the grave. She identified remains. She ensured that the women who had been erased were named again. She attended every trial. She gave testimony. She carried the photographs. And when the trials were over, when the sentences had been carried out, when the camps had been turned into memorials, she wrote their names in a book. She made sure they were remembered. Because the directive had tried to make them disappear, it had tried to render their suffering invisible. It had tried to erase them so completely that even their deaths would be administrative footnotes. But one secretary had kept a copy. One intelligence officer had refused to forget. and history slowly had reassembled the truth. March 1948, Hamelin, West Germany, British military prison. The building is Victorian red brick, high walls, narrow windows. It was a civilian prison once. Now it holds war criminals awaiting execution. Inside, on the second floor, a woman named Irma Gries sits in a cell. She is 22 years old. She was hanged 14 months ago. The woman in the cell now is not Irma Gries. Her name is Dorothea Bintz, 31 years old, former SS-Officerin, female guard supervisor at Ravensbrück. She was tried at Hamburg. Convicted of murder, torture, and systematic abuse of prisoners, sentenced to death, she is waiting. She has been interviewed 6 times since her conviction, by Allied investigators, by tribunal historians, by psychologists studying perpetrator behavior. She is cooperative, she answers questions, she shows no remorse, but she shows no defiance either. She is matter of fact. Clinical. When asked about Block 32, she describes it as a secure facility for high-risk detainees. When asked about interrogations, she says, "We followed protocols." When asked about the executions in September 1944, she says, "We received orders. Orders were carried out." In one interview conducted in January 1948, she has shown the directive. The 8 pages, the signatures. She is asked if she has seen it before. She says no. She is asked if she was aware such a document existed. She says no. She is asked if she knew that the treatment of prisoners in Block 32 was authorized at the highest levels. She pauses. Then she says, "We did not need to see the document. We understood the policy." This is the mechanism. This is how it worked. The directive was never distributed to camp guards or interrogators at the operational level. They did not need to see it. They received verbal orders, briefings, directives filtered down through command structures, stripped of paper trails, translated into actions. The guards knew which prisoners were Category 3. They knew the isolation protocols. They knew the interrogation schedules. They knew when the 60 days were up. They knew what special treatment meant. They did not need Hitler's signature. They had the system. Dorothea Bintz was hanged on May 2, 1947, not 1948. The error is corrected, but the point remains. The system outlived the document. The directive formalized what was already understood. It gave structure to what was already happening. By the time it was signed in April 1944, the apparatus was in place. Ravensbrück had been operational for 5 years. Block 32 had been built in 1943, specifically for isolation cases. The interrogation rooms already existed. Crematorium was running constantly. The directive did not create the machinery. It licensed it. It gave permission. It removed the ambiguity that might have made some officers hesitate. With the signature, there was no doubt. This was lawful. This was authorized. This was policy. Policy, once established, becomes routine. The guards who beat prisoners did not think of themselves as criminals. They were following orders. The interrogators who administered drugs, who used stress positions, who orchestrated psychological breakdowns, did not see themselves as torturers. They were extracting intelligence. The doctors who signed off on malnutrition, who recorded injuries, who administered lethal injections, did not see themselves as murderers. They were processing paperwork. The crematorium workers who burned bodies did not see themselves as accomplices. They were doing their jobs. This is the banality Hannah Arendt would later describe. This is the bureaucratic diffusion of responsibility. No single person commits the atrocity. Everyone participates in a small part of a process. The process itself is the crime, and the directive was the blueprint. After the war, the surviving SOE women were honored. Violette Charbot was posthumously awarded the George Cross, the highest British civilian decoration for gallantry. Noor Inayat Khan, another SOE agent executed at Dachau under similar protocols, received the George Cross and the Croix de Guerre. Odette Sansom, who survived, received the George Cross and became the first woman to receive such recognition. Memorials were built. Plaques were unveiled. Their names were inscribed at the SOE Memorial in Valenquay, France, at St. Paul's Cathedral, at the FANY Memorial in London. But the recognition came slowly. For years, their stories were classified. SOE operations remained secret until the 1960s. Families were told only that their daughters, their wives, their sisters had died on active service. No details, no locations, no circumstances. It was Vera Atkins who told them the truth, who visited families, who explained what had happened, who gave them closure. She spent the rest of her life doing this. She died in 2000. She was 91. The directive itself disappeared into archives. It was filed at the Imperial War Museum, at the National Archives in Kew, at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. Researchers accessed it. Historians cited it. It appeared in footnotes of academic papers, but it did not enter public consciousness. The Holocaust dominated the narrative. The Eastern Front, the atomic bombs, the firebombing of cities. The suffering of 39 women, however systematic, however authorized, was a small chapter in a vast book of horrors. But small chapters matter, because they reveal the nature of the system. The directive shows that the abuse was not incidental. It was not the result of a few sadistic guards. It was planned, approved, documented. It shows that the highest levels of the Nazi state understood exactly what was being done and authorized it explicitly. It removes the possibility of deniability. It removes the possibility that this was chaos or excess or the fog of war. It was deliberate. It was methodical. It was signed. And it shows something else. It shows that the Nazi state understood the power of bureaucracy, that evil does not require monsters, it requires systems, memo templates, filing cabinets, routing slips, carbon copies, procedures. Once the procedure is in place, once the forms are printed, once the boxes are checked, the atrocity becomes routine. The signature at the bottom of the page is not an act of rage. It is an administrative task, a formality, and that is more terrifying than rage. Because rage is individual, bureaucracy scales. Johanna Altvater lived quietly after the war. She returned to Bavaria. She never spoke publicly about the directive. She gave her testimony. She submitted her evidence. Then she withdrew. Researchers who tried to contact her in the 1960s and 1970s found that she had moved, left no forwarding address. She wanted no recognition, no attention. She had done what she believed was necessary. She had kept the copy. She had brought it forward. That was enough. She died in 1983. Obituaries, if there were any, did not mention the directive. She was not a hero in the public narrative. She was a footnote. But without her, the directive would have been destroyed. The carbon paper would have been discarded. The evidence would have been burned like the bodies, and the 39 women would have remained nameless, erased, as the system intended. But the system failed, not because it was defeated militarily. It was, but because one woman kept carbon paper, because one intelligence officer refused to stop searching, because survivors testified, because prosecutors built cases, because archives preserved documents. The system failed because evidence survived, and evidence, however fragmented, however incomplete, is enough to reconstruct truth. The directive did not cause the suffering. The suffering would have happened regardless, but the directive proved it was authorized, and that proof mattered because it closed the door on denial. It made accountability possible. It made justice, however imperfect, achievable. And it left a warning that the worst crimes are not committed in frenzy, they are committed with paperwork. Present day, the National Archives, Kew, London. Reading room is quiet, fluorescent lights hum overhead. Researchers sit at wooden desks, gloves on, documents spread before them. In the far corner, a graduate student opens a file box. Reference code HS8896, SOE personnel files. She is writing a dissertation on women in wartime intelligence. She has requested 20 files. She will spend the next 6 hours reading, typed reports, handwritten notes, photographs, service records, letters. The paper is brittle. Some pages are stained, water damage, age. The ink has faded on some. Others are perfectly legible, as if typed yesterday. She finds the directive on page 43 of a compiled evidence file. It is a photocopy. The original is held in a climate-controlled vault, accessible only with special permission. But the photocopy is enough. She reads it. She has read about it before in secondary sources, but reading the actual document is different. The language is so calm, so procedural. Category 3 subjects are to be processed within a maximum 60-day operational window. Processed, like inventory. Like paperwork, not tortured, not murdered, processed. She photographs the pages with her phone, as permitted by archive rules. She will include excerpts in her dissertation. She will cite it properly. She will explain its significance. But she knows that most people will not read her dissertation. It will sit in a university library database. It will be downloaded by a few other researchers. It will be referenced perhaps in future work. But the directive itself, the actual document, will remain obscure, known to specialists, invisible to the public. This is the fate of most historical evidence. It is preserved, catalogued, available, but not widely known. The Holocaust is taught in schools. The Nuremberg trials are commemorated. The major crimes are remembered. But the smaller documents, the ones that show the mechanics, the ones that prove the intent, remain in archives. They are too detailed for textbooks, too bureaucratic for documentaries, too specific for memorials. They are essential evidence, but they are not dramatic. And history, as it is publicly consumed, requires drama. But drama is not the same as truth. Drama simplifies. It creates heroes and villains. It builds narratives that satisfy. Truth is messier. Truth is a secretary who kept carbon paper and said nothing for 2 years. Truth is an intelligence officer who spent years tracking names through rubble and testimony. Truth is a document that authorized horror in procedural language and was signed by 3 men, 2 of whom were dead before they could be tried. Truth does not resolve cleanly. It accumulates, slowly, in fragments. The directive is one fragment. It is not the whole story. It does not explain why the Nazi state became what it became. It does not explain how millions of people participated, enabled, ignored, or actively supported systematic atrocity. It does not explain how a society with deep cultural, scientific, and philosophical traditions produced industrial genocide. Those are larger questions. Questions that have generated libraries of scholarship. Questions that remain, in some sense, unanswerable. But the directive answers a smaller question. It answers, was the abuse of Allied female agents authorized? Yes. Was it systematic? Yes. Was it policy? Yes. And that answer matters because it removes accident from the equation. It removes the possibility that these women suffered because of rogue commanders or local excess. They suffered because the system was designed to make them suffer, and the system was authorized from the top. This is the nature of bureaucratic evil. It is not passionate. It is not impulsive. It is planned. It is approved, it is implemented, and it is documented. The documentation is the key because documentation is how bureaucracies function. Memos, directives, orders, filing systems. Without documentation, there is no accountability, no chain of command, no clarity. Documentation is efficiency, but it is also evidence. The Nazis documented everything. They believed they would win. They believed the documents would vindicate them. They were wrong. After the war, enormous efforts were made to destroy records. As Allied forces closed in from east and west, SS units burned files, dynamited archives, shredded papers. Entire warehouses of documentation were reduced to ash, but not everything burned. Some was hidden, some was captured before it could be destroyed, some survived. Why accident? A clerk who failed to carry out orders, a building that did not fully burn, a file box that fell behind a cabinet. The directive survived because Johanna Altvater took carbon paper, a deliberate act, but also an improbable one. How many other documents were destroyed? How many other directives, equally damning, are simply gone? We reconstruct history from what survives, and what survives is incomplete, biased toward what was durable, what was hidden, what someone chose to save. The historical record is not a complete picture. It is a ruin. We walk through the ruin and try to imagine the structure. We find pieces, a directive here, a testimony there, a photograph, a logbook, a letter. We assemble the pieces, we infer, we contextualize, we argue, and we write. But we must also acknowledge the silence, the gaps, the women whose names we do not know, the prisoners who left no testimony, the documents that burned, the grave that were never found, the suffering that was never recorded. For every story we recover, there are dozens lost. For every directive that survived, there are others that did not. History is not only what happened, it is what we can prove happened, and proof requires evidence. The directive is evidence. It proves authorization, it proves intent, it proves system, but it does not prove the totality of what occurred. It does not capture the individual experiences of the women who endured Block 32. It does not record their thoughts, their fears, their resilience, their final moments. It is a bureaucratic artifact. It tells us what the perpetrators planned. It does not tell us what the victims felt. For that we rely on testimony, on the survivors who spoke, on the witnesses who remembered, on the investigators who listened. Vera Atkins spent years collecting those testimonies. Other investigators did the same. War crimes tribunals recorded hours of testimony. Much of it is archived now, available, digitized, searchable. But testimony is fragile. It is subjective. It is memory which shifts, which is influenced by trauma, by time, by the act of retelling. Testimony is essential. But it is not the same as documentation. We need both. The graduate student finishes reading. She closes the file. She returns it to the archive desk. She signs out. She leaves the building. Outside, London is grey and cold. Traffic moves along Kew Road. People walk past. They do not know what is inside the building behind them. They do not know about the directive, the women, the 60-day window. They are living their lives. And history for most people is background, something studied in school, something commemorated on certain days. Something distant. But history is not distant. It is a set of choices that were made, choices that produced systems, systems that produced outcomes. The directive was a choice. Hitler chose to sign it. Himmler chose to countersign it. Bormann chose to witness it. The administrators chose to distribute it. The camp commandants chose to implement it. The guards chose to carry it out. At every level there were choices, not easy choices perhaps, not choices made in freedom, but choices nonetheless. And the accumulation of those choices produced the outcome: 39 women dead, dozens more brutalized, families shattered, lives erased. And then other choices. Johanna Altvater chose to keep the carbon paper. Vera Atkins chose to search. Prosecutors chose to build cases. Judges chose to convict. Archivists chose to preserve. Historians chose to research. Teachers chose to teach. And now people choose to remember, or not. That is the choice we face. To engage with this history, to understand its mechanisms, to learn from it, or to let it recede, to treat it as distant, as irrelevant. As something that happened to other people in another time. But the mechanisms remain. Bureaucracy remains. Systems remain. The capacity to diffuse responsibility, to follow orders, to process paperwork while people suffer, that remains. The technologies have changed. The ideologies have shifted. But the underlying dynamic, the way that ordinary people can participate in extraordinary cruelty when it is systematized, authorized, made routine, that has not changed. The directive is a warning, not because it is unique, but because it is typical. This is how atrocity works, not through monsters, through memos. The sun sets over Kew. The archive will open again tomorrow. The files will be there. The directive will be there, waiting for the next researcher, the next student, the next person who wants to understand. The document cannot speak, but it can be read. And in the reading, the truth persists, imperfectly, incompletely, but enough to remember, enough to learn, enough to ensure that the women who suffered are not forgotten, that their names are spoken, that their sacrifice is honored. Not with statues or speeches, but with knowledge, with memory, with the quiet, persistent work of keeping the record intact. Because the alternative is erasure, and erasure is what the directive intended.